All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Warcraft Orcs Humans review. What's up, Dynamo?
Hello, by the way.
So Dynamo's been rewatching Eon of the Hawk. So if he says anything you don't immediately understand, just blame it on Metathron. And honestly, I wish
Yeah.
I could blame Warcraft Orcs and Humans on Metathron because it was about as insane in terms of the micro department. But some things you got to blame Blizzard for, and this is one of those things. And while it is certainly a foundational title, and you have to couch your analysis in its history, it definitely didn't really seem like you could learn too much from it. I mean, from the resource placements that were just obviously it was fine in theory if you could expand, but you can't. You have to apparently destroy your town hall if you want to place a new one or something silly, according to Cocaine Man anyway. And like all this other junk, I don't know what the deal is with that, and that was a big sticking point to begin with. But then you have like the fact that you have such a primitive interface to work around, and all these other issues that intercept your ability to play the game anyway. They kind of speak for themselves. Like I don't think that it really bears too much repeating, bears too much analysis. But maybe you have some particular thoughts on this game that we can riff off of for a little bit.
Well, this is actually the probably the oldest RTS I've seen because I've never really played Dune 2, which is the game that this game is inspired by. The first Command and Conquer game came out, I think, a year after this, so that one is a little bit newer. But I feel like comparisons between the two are pretty much in order, considering the age was similar and it was still the era where developers were trying to figure out what's what in the RTS genre. And I feel like there's not really much to talk about this game in particular, really, because the map design, like, even if we ignore the micro maps for a second, which, by the way, were essentially mirrored, you were basically doing the same thing in both campaigns. Like, you entered the mines twice, and then you had the micro map on the overworld, so to speak, for both campaigns, which was pretty much the same exact thing. And I feel like the mission design in general was way too repetitive. You can't really tell one mission to the next. Pretty much the only difference was whether there were going to be bridges or not, like whether bridges were going to be a factor or not, because that usually meant that there was only one way into your base or into the opponent's base, which just makes every map basically revolve around choke points instead of having, several entry points and relatively open areas to fight on. And that is really the only thing that set each map apart, aside from, as you mentioned, the fact that gold mines for some reason are from you at the beginning. And like, you couldn't really tell one mission from the next in that sense. It's not like any of them had really any personality, so to speak. Like, I'm pretty sure I mentioned during the walkthrough that the maps felt like they were randomly generated, like by a random generator level design thing, like something that you program to basically output randomly generated levels in 10 seconds or whatever. Like, they were pretty much at the level of quality, which is pretty bad, honestly. Like, it's definitely not what you want, even for a game this old. Like,
For
the first
sure.
Command and Conquer game, as I said, as many issues as that game had, it certainly had way more variety between the various missions. Like, there was much more going on than this. And that's pretty much my first impression when it comes to that. Like, I just feel like there wasn't really much thought put into the missions themselves before, discussing the gameplay itself. I feel like the level design really was the stinker here. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, hindsight is 2020 only immediately after, and then you start to forget things. And so maybe I'm forgetting some really egregious cases in the original Command and Conquer game, but I do feel like generally you had multiple paths, even if some of them were obviously not great. Like I'm sure there were some cases where micro or pseudo micro missions where you really only could go one way. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of the macro missions, or at least a fair number of them, were a bit more open-ended in that. And of course, Command and Conquer has height, which Warcraft 1 does not. There's no different height levels. It's all the same thing. So that was something that played into Command and Conquer's favor, I would say. Even if it might not actually be something that plays into the gameplay. Like, I don't know if there is a height advantage in the original Command and Conquer, but
No, there isn't, but
right. But just the
it
fact
still
that
adds variety.
yeah, it adds some visual variety, and it also breaks up the pathfinding of the areas so that there are a little bit more choke points, but also with more open areas and just different ways to interact with terrain. And terrain has a bit more of an important in the grand scheme of things for that particular title compared to this, where it was just, is there a bridge? Yes. Okay, well, just sit at the bridge and then eventually push in. And if there isn't a bridge, then you might have a little bit of a harder time figuring out where the enemies are coming from. But otherwise, it shouldn't be too difficult. And actually, to the game's credit, the AI does take a myriad of different pathways to get to your base. It's just that I kind of feel like that's spoiled based on some of the underlying mechanics of the game, which we will obviously get into later. But as far as the level design is concerned, the AI does at least take advantage of the extra pathways when they do exist. It's just that they don't really exist as easily. And because of the interface issues that I mentioned at the beginning of the review, and of course that we both observed during the playthroughs, for sure, the player was not empowered to attempt to take on the like the same sort of path that the AI inevitably did, where the player is not really empowered to feel like, oh yeah, I can definitely, go ahead and try to take these pathways the same way the AI is, because the AI doesn't have a selection limit and I do, and the AI doesn't have that tiresome mouse movement required to make anything happen. Whereas I was actually feeling like I was getting carpal tunnel while playing this game, and so obviously interface plays a pretty big role in disrupting the player's economy of actions, feeling like what they can actually do, and that plays into the frustration of playing the game. As far as the level design outside of how that player interacts with it, and outside of how the AI interacts with it, I would say generally another thing that plays into the level design is the fact that the AI just has a bunch of pre-play stuff, so they don't actually build anything from there. They rebuild some stuff, which is to the game's credit, because some RTSs that are much more modern than Warcraft 1 don't have AI that can properly rebuild stuff. That's something that actually always happens, seemingly, in Blizzard games, which is, it's sad that has to be considered a feature or something. Like that, it should just be something that you would expect. But unfortunately, you can't always expect that from RTS games. And so I'm glad to see that this game was no different in that sense, where the AI does try to rebuild it. Of course, the mechanic of how you rebuild, or as soon as you start placing a construction site, it immediately has full HP. That was pretty dumb. But outside of that, I mean, sure, the fact that the AI rebuilds it, that's nice, but the AI does start out with 1 billion pre-play stuff in some maps, and that was another thing that added to the frustration, where it's just lopsided in favor of the AI. And the terrain wasn't always in favor of the AI, of course, because like we were talking about, the bridges were definitely something that the player could take advantage of more than the AI could. I guess at that point it's a bit more of something that breaks even, because sometimes the pathways were kind of sneaky and the player needed to scout them out, and the AI would obviously know where they were. Other than that, I'm not really sure if there's much to say on the level design, because like you said, it definitely did feel like, maybe not random. I don't know if I felt the random generated part of it. There definitely did seem to be like a lot of gold mines placed in areas where it doesn't even make sense, because like the player is not going to, some missions the player couldn't even mine, like the overworld micro missions, for example, and they did have gold mines. And I guess that was meant to be like, well, the AI mines in those missions or something, so of course maybe they'll mine from there later on given the opportunity. I never really observed that, but I don't know. It just seems weird that they would do that. It seems weird that they would have the same looking environments. They really only had 3 tile sets, if you will, and one of them was like the green tile set that was a bit more like Sunnyside or whatever. Then there was the darker one that was more like a swampland, and then there was, of course, the caves. And there was enough visual variety in the caves, I think, compared to the others, but the other 2 were very bland, and the fact that those are the only 2 that we had, and they had as little work put into them as they did, meant that it was a pretty big eyesore. So I think at every metric that you can stratify level design on, Warcraft 1 definitely came away as a stinker, like you said. I don't really think there's too much to take away from that from an educational perspective, because I think people have advanced so far, and this is, again, in something you have to take into account when talking about this game, is how old it is. But I think people have advanced so far that even custom content developers would probably not make the same mistakes that we would see in this. Not some of the more like foundational ones where you wouldn't have decent enough visual variety without it clashing. Like unless you're making Warcraft 3 maps or something where everything is going to clash, you're probably not going to be dealing with that same issue. And of course, nobody's going to completely issue terrain height, for example. There's going to be people who have cliffs and water and low ground and high ground or whatever. And that's pretty much a staple of every single RTS, because pretty much everybody has agreed that is important for designing a fun and engaging game. And so like these are important pieces of a level. So of course we're going to have them in our RTS. So in that case, like, I don't know if that's something to the game's credit. Like, did people look at this and say, "Wow, we really need to add something in," or is that something that you should more so side with Command and Conquer for because they added it in first, as far as we know? Maybe that was present in Dune 2 as far as terrain was. Like, I don't know what this game has that is missing in Dune 2 and vice versa, but I don't think I'll ever play Dune 2, so that'll be a question that will never be answered.
Yeah.
But,
And well, you say that the custom content designers know better, but then again, how many times have we seen stuff like inaccessible mirror fields, or even stuff like Vespine geysers that are incorrectly placed and result in workers getting stuck? So I'm not entirely sure if custom content designers have fully learned their lessons in that regard.
no, I think most of the people who are still making stuff now, I mean, unless you're not making an RTS production, in which case you clearly haven't learned much because you're working with an RTS engine. Like, barring that kind of weird subhuman mentality, you're probably going to be able to look at what you're making and compare it to Warcraft 1 and say, wow, my stuff is better. Like, it almost seems like you would have to try to make something that's more inaccessible and more annoying and more just frustrating to play and more lacking in features.
Yeah, makes sense. And, well, besides that, the only thing I believe we can discuss really that has any merit or depth to it is the general gameplay, of which there isn't really much to talk about except for Yes My Lord, which is the main theme of the game. But
dude, the fucking voice acting in this game, the lack of it rather, is really what pisses me off. I can't believe how many times it's kind of impressive that one guy did all the voices in a sense, but I'm also kind of used to that where obviously, like a lot of people in the custom campaign scene for StarCraft 1, like one guy would do all the voices. Maybe they would get like one other person to help out. But at least then, like the unit responses, they're still using like stock Blizzard unit responses, you know? So it's a little bit different. Whereas, like in this case, everything was the same guy. And it really grated on you after a while. And the fact that he only recorded 2 lines for the human units as yes lines, right? Like order accepted lines.
Yeah.
That was really fucking annoying. Could not believe that. And maybe that's the same thing for the orc, but I just didn't notice it as much. I think they had like 3 or 4. So it was just very strange. Yeah. So yes, my lord. But no.
And this also translates to the actual graphics, where most of the buildings really look the same. So it's kind of hard to tell them apart at a glance. They have the same exact roofs. Like the only main exception is the donut-based town center for some reason, and like the mage buildings, like the mage tower and the mage skull,
right?
Which is a really stupid concept, but whatever.
Listen, and, whatever you want to throw in there, as long as it looks a little bit different, it'll be a welcome addition. Yeah, unfortunately.
Exactly. Because every other building looks the same, so it's really, really hard to tell what you're looking at most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, even though the sizes are different, like I was struggling to tell farms apart from some of the other structures in the later stages of the game where I was playing as the humans. So it's definitely something that impacts readability. I don't think we commented on it too much, besides like laughing at the donut and maybe saying that, oh yeah, these structures look similar. But for me as the player, it was hard to tell which structure I was fighting in a game where the structures mattered more. And like maybe damage was a little bit lower, or the combat was a little slower, or anything like that, or like units that pop out of these structures could be significantly more powerful from the get-go. In a game like that, where it actually does matter which structure you're fighting, definitely would be an issue. But I don't know. In this case, just because the game was so simple, it probably wasn't as big of a deal as maybe it would have been otherwise.
Yeah. But apart from that, the only thing left to discuss is the general gameplay, of which there isn't really much to talk about. You have the melee units, which are basic. You basically have the swordman and the knight. And the units are all mirrored, by the way, as you saw in the playthrough. So there's only very minor differences between the two races. And one of the differences is actually that the human archer has more range, also slightly more range, and the orc archer has 1 more point of damage, which I found really weird, but that's how it is. And besides that, like I don't really see anything else that can be taken away. There's not really much to talk about. Like the gameplay is as simple as it gets. It's just a footman, knight, catapult, archer. That's pretty much all the units you get aside from the spellcasters. And like there isn't really much going on in terms of what unit is effective against what. Like I don't really know if footmen are better at doing something than knights are. I think they're just cheaper essentially. So the knight is in some ways a straight up upgrade over the footman, and which is something they tried to tackle in Warcraft 3 by having different armor values. I'm pretty sure, although I don't think they were very successful there. But still, it reinforces the idea that the gameplay is very primitive and there is not much depth to it. The only interesting thing is the spellcasters, which of course we are very much used to by now, but I guess they were the game's main innovation at the time. There wasn't really anything quite like that. I don't think the spells were very well done at all, especially the fucking purple cloud of death that just one-shot every single unit you had for some reason. And even the summonable units were really stupid, but what do you think of the spellcaster system in this game?
Well, I think actually there's some merit to some of the spells, but once again, the Blizzard does this all the time with all of their spellcasters. They overload the spellcasters with a lot of different abilities, and the problem is, I don't want to reduce micro in terms of like precise clicking and making sure that like it's not front loaded where you push a button you get a massive effect immediately. Like you have to take positioning into account. You have to take, maybe there's a spell channel time, maybe there's a certain amount of time required before the spell kicks in, or there's some other positional element like it fires a projectile, and the further the projectile goes, the higher damage it deals, or something like that. Like you can figure out whatever way you want to do to make your spells interesting and actually require some skill. The problem for me that really pops up with Blizzard is that they have spells where maybe they'll even have good spells, like multiple good spells on the same unit, but oftentimes it's one good spell and then a bunch of useless ones or very, very niche ones. And in theory, that's okay, but in practice, it results in pretty much that caster only being used for that spell, and sometimes not being used at all, which is where you see like ghosts are very rarely used, even though in theory, Lockdown's a great ability. It's just not something that you'll see in most professional games, most 1v1 games. And science vessels are used for irradiate and for defense matrix, but EMP you'll very rarely see. It's not because the enemy doesn't field a lot of spellcasters, it's just because EMP takes energy away from using irradiate and using defense matrix. And maybe in some matchups you will use EMP, but then you won't use Defense Matrix or something like that. So it feels like these casters have too much utility, too much power in realms where it would make more sense to reduce the amount of power or consolidate some of these abilities, which is something that I try to do in Hydra, so that you would have a little bit more room for like, when you see this unit, you know what it's capable of immediately, and you know what the player who's using it is most likely going to use it for. And the versatility, while is something that you might be, somebody might say, all right, these units are very versatile, and that's something that's a point in their favor, but 9 times out of 10, you're only going to be using them for like 1 or 2 of their 3 or 4 spells. And in Warcraft 1, it was pretty much the same thing, where I would only use healing, and I would only use, what's the other one? The Summon Water Elemental one. I used the fire thing a little bit. And then in the orc side, I wouldn't even use Raise Dead really unless it was a micro mission. But I guess I could see where that would be somewhat useful. And Unholy Aura would probably be more useful in that sense because it basically makes the unit invulnerable. Whereas like pretty much 1 of the 2 or 3 spells that these casters have is useful. And like that's not really what you want to see, obviously, but it is something that where I don't know. It seems like a pattern. Like I was actually kind of surprised that was still something that I was experiencing all the way back in Warcraft 1. It's something that I'm very used to from StarCraft 1, Warcraft 3, StarCraft 2, where all of these different games have so many spells and so many avenues for a single unit to have a crazy amount of impact. Whereas I would rather reduce the individual significance of units and make it so that you have to build a lot of them, or you have to upgrade them a lot, or specialize them a lot. And that very rarely happens in Blizzard RTSs, not to the same degree that I would like to see anyways. And maybe this is more of a personal thing, but I just feel like there's way too much utility in some of these units. And like if you can have a unit that can cast Poison Cloud and kill everything, or summon a demon and kill everything that way, it's like, why are you even... Why do you have 2 abilities that can kill everything? You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of the same thing for the human, where they can summon a water elemental that can kill anything, or they can summon a giant meteor storm or whatever the fuck that is and kill everything there. And like, why not just have 1 ability that kills everything instead of 2? And I understand that their mechanisms of how they kill everything is different, but it's not in an interesting fashion to really separate them. Really, the net cause or the net gain is actually, like, it's only situationally better to use one or the other, and it's not situationally better in the sense that you would want it to be. It's like either way, I'm going to come out on top from just pushing one button. And that's the opposite of what you want out of spellcasting, because then positioning doesn't matter and all this other stuff doesn't really matter in order to see like how effective your end result actually is. I think it spoke to that pretty obviously, though, like the fact that the ending of both campaigns were just spamming demons or spamming water elementals, and that was how we won the last two missions of the orc campaign and the last two missions of the human campaign. It's just like a foregone conclusion that you're going to build this unit, you're going to spam out this OP unit, and I mean that's just a limitation of the tech tree design mixed in with the fact that the spells were so powerful. And the fact that the AI was so indomitable otherwise, like it was so terrifying almost to even bother trying to go attack them because of how powerful they actually were. So I don't know if you had any similar or even different thoughts based on that you wanted to add in, but that was basically my take on the spellcasters.
No, yeah, I agree. Like, especially the last missions where you just use the water or demon elementals to basically win the game for you. At this point, you're not even playing RTS. You're simply trying to prevent your spellcasters from dying in one hit by some other bullshit attack or invisible unit or other gimmick like that. And then just basically, as soon as you get 8 of them, you cannot possibly lose anymore. Like, even if your entire base is destroyed, you will still win pretty much.
Yeah, that happened in one of the missions. So.
Yeah. So, like, it kind of just shows how the entire game falls apart by that point. Like, there's not really enough gameplay, enough strategy, like enough engagement to go with. Like, I get that it's a cool concept that you want to have this fantasy setting, and so you want to have elementals or summon units or whatever. That's a common trope in the genre, but I definitely feel like it wasn't done in a way that was reasonable. Like, maybe the closest comparison I can think of is the Broodling in StarCraft, maybe, but even that is not really the same thing. The way it works is different, so you cannot just randomly sit around and cast it, and even then it's a weak unit, like it's more about the impact of the attack itself rather than the two stupid Necrons that come out of it, so to speak.
It's always about something other than Necron, let's be real.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think there's really much else to say about this game. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on the title.
Well, I was thinking about like what this would lead me to believe, similar to one of the questions that I asked in one of the Command & Conquer reviews, if not more than one, was like, what do you think will be awaiting for us, like awaiting us in the next game? And I know you already have a fair amount of experience with the second title, so I guess I'll answer this question myself in that sense, where the question posed is, what do you expect to be leveled up in a perfect world? What would you expect out of the next title in this franchise? And I mean, interface problems were a big thing here, so I would definitely hope that they would have improved that. And from the sound of it, it seems like that is a safe bet. So hopefully we'll enjoy that when it comes around. As far as the tech trees, I think that spellcasters probably need an overhaul. I would say probably something to spend resources on in a different manner. Like, I know that they added in oil as a third resource. I wouldn't necessarily think that would be the approach to go. I would hope that they would just make the resource spending of gold and lumber a little bit more complex. And obviously StarCraft is the one that I always point to. But you can do something different than StarCraft does, where expensive units and upgrades are always going to cost gas. You could make it so that the second resource was a little bit more rare, and then you used it more rarely. Or you could make it so that there is a third resource and you don't use it for just one kind of unit, in this case, which is naval stuff. Like, I'm sure there's like more intelligent ways than what they ended up doing to diversify the economy a little bit. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I feel like the tech trees were very lackluster in this game. And so I would just hope to see them more completely realized in that sense. And so more distinct from each other, which apparently doesn't happen, and more...
that is definitely the one thing that we cannot expect much from when it comes to the next title.
Right.
That the tech tree is definitely not diverse enough, and there's definitely still a lot of units that are, straight up upgrades over the other one, like the Footman and the Knight example that I gave. Still applies to the second game. So in that sense, really, the main logical successor to this title is actually the Age of Empires games, especially the second one, where the Footman and the Knight are very different units in terms of what they do and how they perform, even though they're pretty much, just a unit with a sword. So it's not like they have spells or weird ass abilities that make them stand out, but their gameplay roles are very, very different, which is what you want from an RTS. You want units to perform different tasks and different roles instead of everything being just either a melee unit and a range unit and have the diversity in there.
Yeah, I think that like an obvious way to improve that would have those damage types and armor types and stuff that of course are very infamous in Warcraft 3 because they're so dumb, but those are a dime a dozen, so I guess I would expect some system like that, just so that units do different things. I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about the Footmen and Knight thing, apparently Footmen and Archers are more powerful than just spamming Archers based on if there's a more open battlefield, but the bridges made that pretty much moot in most missions, so I didn't really feel like it was necessary. At the end of the day, we could throw a lot of units away. We were just distance mining the whole time. So that leads me to my next thing that I would hope to see is the ability to expand. I've been told that that's a feature, so that's great.
Yeah.
Can't wait to actually be able to expand and play an RTS. And so, outside of just being able to interact with the game better and being able to have more exciting tech trees to use, more intelligent tech trees to use, I would say I'm definitely hoping for better level design, the ability to expand, and more aggressive AI, but also more fair AI in that sense, where they don't start out with a billion pre-placed things and all this other stuff. That's more of a pipe dream. I don't actually expect that, but maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So we will hope. We'll see about that when it comes to the next game and when it comes to other RTS games of this type, like of the medieval or I guess mostly end-to-end combat type. But I don't think we'll be playing more clones of Warcraft 1. Like there's one that's called 7 Years War, which is pretty terrible apparently, and it's basically the same thing. Like it has the same resolution, the same controls. Like I can quickly post a screenshot if you want to get you an idea of what it looks like. I'm pretty sure this was suggested once on stream, but yeah, like I don't think we want to play more primitive games.
That
like
interface looks worse than Warcraft 1, so I think I'm all set. Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that like people have talked to me about before is like, oh, you should, if you're going to play Warcraft 1, you should play Dune 2 or something like that. Like, really, I'm only playing Warcraft 1 because I know it's a quick game. It's an old game, and it is the first in a franchise that I also have played, with regards to Warcraft 3 and plan to play with regards to Warcraft 2. So it's like it makes sense for me to play Warcraft 1 in that sense, a little bit more than Dune 2, which presumably is a bit of a longer one, a bit more of a slog. Like, it might be interesting for a little while. Maybe that could be like a fun weekend stream or something where I just play a little bit of it and then I say, all right, bye, I'm not playing this ever again, but I'm not going to dedicate a whole playthrough of that. That seems like a lost cause in that sense. And so I'd much rather stick to just, at least in this point in time, I don't see any reason to do that. Maybe if I really run out of RTS games, 23 years from now. No risk of that. Yeah. So
yeah, I guess sticking to games that are more similar to Warcraft 2 and up. So Warcraft 2, StarCraft, Red Alert 2 or whatever. Right. I think that's mostly the target we're aiming for. If the police agrees to that, of course.
The police are coming, boys. Now, so with the cops hot on my tail, I'll say Warcraft 1, Orcs and Humans. I don't know, shit game. Not a whole lot to look at right now. Probably was a bit more impressive for its time, like we talked about the spellcasters being something that maybe this is the first time we saw it, or maybe it was in Populous, one of those other ones. But yeah, like it seems like a pretty exciting game if you're new to the prospect of even playing an RTS in the first place. As far as actually enjoying like the title, I don't think you really can, and hopefully it's one of those things where the end result of the game in general is that you saw this playthrough, you skipped around a couple of the missions or whatever, you thought, wow, I haven't seen Warcraft 1 before, or haven't seen it in a long time, and it really didn't hold up, but wow, it was really bad. And maybe you got some humor out of it, but unfortunately there's really not much to analyze here. So hopefully you enjoyed the production, and once again, thanks to Dynamo for joining me for this, and we'll be back for Warcraft 2 at some point, so stay tuned. Fasten your seatbelts. We're going on a wild ride. Apparently the base, am I correct in saying the base game is a little bit more reasonable than the expansion?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Definitely.
We may have to call in the fucking cheat squad or something for the expansion. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. I'm confident in my abilities to at least clear the main game. We'll get that done. We'll see if we can do the rest of it. So, looking forward to that. Until I won't be looking forward to it anymore because I find out it's really annoying. So hopefully that doesn't happen, and I'll catch you guys later. If that's all we have to say.
Yes, my lord.
Yes, my
Yes.
lord. Fuck me, dude.